Thank you. So what a great pleasure to be with Policy Circle. And thank you very much to the last speakers. I've been listening to you. And I'm very well aware of India. I was fortunately on the board of Max Hospitals for a number of years, and I've been coming since I was 20 to India. I came as a medical student as part of my elective. So you're part of my love affair. So I'm talking about today newer paradigms, tobacco harm reduction. I want to just go forward and show you that I was an oncologist for all my working life at Guy's. I was one of the very early oncologists, and I took on lung cancer very early on when the dominant tumor type was small cell lung cancer, which had an absolutely miserable outcome. So from the earliest days, I've tried to encourage quitting, but I've also understood quite clearly that it's difficult. So this is my disclosures, several pharma companies, which we always are, and we do a lot of clinical trials. I've published well over 300 papers on clinical trials. I'm a harm reduction consultant to Philip Morris, and the reason I'm doing that is because I've moved to trying to prevent cancer from having to treat cancer with such a miserable outcome and a huge expense. So when you want to reduce the risk of a lung cancer or any cancer, you have to identify the nature of the production and exposure to the source of the carcinogens. Well, it's not difficult in lung cancer. As you can see here, men, 90% of lung cancers are associated with smoking, and in women, 80% of lung cancer is associated with smoking. And of course, the reason was, as quoted by Professor Gopal, is of course pollution within the home. So why? Well, this tells you that 64% of smokers who've developed lung cancer continue to smoke. And it was this fact which really has pushed me to trying to understand smoke and the carcinogens in smoke. Because when you've got lung cancer, surely to goodness, you will stop smoking. There's every evidence that if you do so, your prognosis is better. Not by much, but definitely better. Nevertheless, you cannot quit smoking. You're under stress and it's impossible. So what you've got is a huge group of people who are unable or unwilling to quit. Unable means they can't, they're addicted. Unwilling means they don't want to. We know, and all of us know, that if you don't change the number of smokers, you'll not change the number of cancers, and you will not change the number of chronic respiratory disease. So what happens if we as a population, we as policy directors, we as doctors fail or refuse to innovate? So where we are is we've got a problem. What can we do? Well, we can just treat the problem, or we can try and do something about the root cause. So you've got left 1 billion smokers in the world, of which 100 million are within India. 80 million lung cancers, 8% of smokers will develop lung cancer, and I'm not talking about bronchitis, and I'm not talking about bladder cancer, and I'm not talking about kidney cancer, and I'm not talking about esophagogastric cancer or mouth cancer. I'm talking about lung cancer. 8% of smokers will develop lung cancer, and that will result in 64 million lung cancer deaths. Now, no nation can afford the new innovative treatments for cancer. Though you have a great industry at making generics, it is still a vast price. So the cancer risk factors in India, if you look at 1990, and then you look 30 years later, what you see is smoking is number 1, and chewing tobacco is number 4. So we don't need to look too much further as to what is the first thing we should do. Yes, you've got to address pollution, and there's no doubt that pollution will compound the risk of cancers. So what is the concept of harm reduction? And I founded a society long ago, now got 8,000 members, on harm reduction. The whole concept is that we accept that people have behavioral issues and we deal with them. We deal with it in the UK with a fair skin. You use sunscreen. We deal with it in motor cars where we put in airbags, we put in crumple zones, we put in disc brakes, we put in steering columns that don't crush your chest. So we know that we have to reduce harm. The concept really started by reducing the harm during the time of drug addiction and HIV. It was a massive issue, came very fast. We introduced safe zones for people injecting, and though it was illegal, we gave clean needles and clean syringes. So harm reduction saves lives. Now, the huge misconception, which has been around for many years, is that nicotine is the cause of cancer. Of course, nicotine is the cause of addiction. It is not the cause of cancer. Nicotine is not a carcinogen, and nicotine replacement therapy has been used for many decades by doctors to try and help smoking reduction. But what are the innovations that we should look at? And the first of these is snus. Then I will go on to vaping and e-cigarettes, and then heated tobacco products. Snus is an oral tobacco. Now, we know in India that oral tobacco, chewing tobacco, is a disaster. Snus is a very different tobacco. It has no heavy metals, and it is pasteurized. It's in a little tiny sack, which you put behind your lower lip, and it gives you nicotine, but you don't combust. Now, the blue line here is male smokers in Sweden in 1963, 50% of the population. What you can see is something dramatic has happened. And what was dramatic was the introduction of snus. And what you can see is as snus went up, smoking rates dropped by 30% by 1986 and have continued down. This is female smokers. They picked up snus later. And as you can see, as their snus rate went up, their smoking rates are down. So what you can see is that you've converted someone from combustion to a safer method. Now, why is it safer? Well, if you look here, death rate per 100,000 males attributable to tobacco, not cancer, all causes of death: lung disease, cardiovascular disease, vascular disease, and cancer. And this is the rate attributed now in the current years to these tobacco-related diseases in Sweden. And what you can see is they've got a rate of 152. The green line down here is 373. That's the European average, so it's twice. And if you come down to here with Hungary, it is a quarter. So this enabled the Federal Food and Drug Association to look at what was the cause of this reduced risk. And they said, well, it seems to work. And they issued a modified risk tobacco product order. And they said using general snus instead of cigarettes puts you at a lower risk of mouth cancer, a lower risk of heart disease, a lower risk of lung cancer, of stroke, emphysema, and bronchitis. So that was a pretty good review. Public Health England, of which I've been part, says harm reduction is saving lives. And here, of course, we have a population only of now 60 million, compared to your 1.3 billion. Every minute, someone is admitted to hospital from smoking, with around 79,000 deaths a year in England alone. Our new review reinforced the findings that vaping was a fraction of the risk of smoking, at least 95% less harmful. Very few people know that. And of negligible risk to bystanders. So if you're by somebody who's vaping, you don't get any toxicants. Yet over half of smokers either falsely believe that vaping is as harmful as smoking or just don't know. Reducing the prevalence of smoking by 1 percentage point each year for 10 years would save in the UK, with our smaller population, 69,000 deaths. And the important thing is these are deaths between 35 and 74. It's not an old person's disease. It would be tragic if thousands of smokers who could quit with the help of an e-cigarette were being put off by false fears of their safety. As we can see, we're now down here in the UK, we're down to 11.5% of tobacco smokers, a huge difference. Now, what else is there? Well, there's heat, and I'll explain what a heated cigarette is compared to a vape. But what you can see here is the difference on a smoking machine on a test filter paper of what is cigarette smoke, one cigarette, and what happens if you use a heated cigarette. And this cream color is, of course, largely water and glycerol. This, of course, is what we were hearing earlier is going into your lungs, whether due to pollution, whether due to tobacco, or whether due to both. Now, what is the science of combustion? What we know is if you heat the cigarette, you do not combust, no burning, you do not light it. Very few toxicants come out before the temperature of 350 degrees or 400 degrees. This is what happens when you combust. You get this outpouring of carcinogens. As the temperature rises, and the temperature of a cigarette will go up, a tip will go up to 800 degrees, and there you get ash, everything's burnt. You get this outpouring of carcinogens. This is shown pictorially here, and this was, again, the Food and Drug Association of America, independently looking at one product, which is ICOS, and they said they guarantee there's no combustion in the ICOS. It does not burn. It reduces levels of toxicants compared to cigarettes. Smokers who switch completely to ICOS, still getting the nicotine, will reduce their exposure to toxicants. It's got a much lower toxic potential than cigarettes. And though you can't prove yet that this will reduce the rate of cancers, it's highly likely that it will do so because the carcinogens are fewer. Now, what we can see is what happened in cigarette sales in Japan with the introduction of, in this case, a heated tobacco product, ICOS. This was the number of 200 billion cigarettes sold a year in Japan, and something happened precipitously to reduce that level. And what happened was the introduction of nicotine in a different way, ICOS, and what you can see on the orange line is ICOS sales, and this is total sales. Now, the important thing is that if you add the ICOS to the previous cigarettes sales in terms of tobacco, you can see there's still a marked reduction. You are not increasing the number of tobacco users. This is Japan, and what you can see here is this precipitous drop in tobacco combustion, cigarette smoking, over a period of 6 years after the introduction of a heated tobacco product. You've gone from 19% to 13%. Same thing happened in New Zealand, but with vaping as well. Same thing happened in the UK with vaping as well. Australia has banned any form of nicotine other than a cigarette, and it is stuck. It cannot reduce its rate. So Public Health England then looked at youth use and quit smoking use, and it came to the following conclusions. Experimentation with e-cigarettes has steadily increased. Regular use remains low. with 1.7% of 11 to 18-year-olds using it regularly. Vaping considers to be associated with smoking. Those who were smoking will both vape and smoke. The proportion who never smoked who use an electronic cigarette at least weekly remains very low. So we don't think we are introducing nicotine and smoking into the population. Quit smoking cigarettes, combining e-cigarettes with stop smoking services does seem to be having an effect, and a good effect. And so we continue with Public Health England to agree that we should both introduce both vaping and heats in the UK in order to help reduce tobacco smoking. So the conclusion is smoking is a major issue in public health and a leading cause of cancer. Quitting is by far the best option, but we realize with 64% of patients with lung cancer unable to quit, it's a very difficult thing to do. Current strategies have failed. We really haven't reduced numbers. Prevalence continues to improve because of your increased population, but the actual numbers of smokers hasn't changed. You need the whole story to understand the success or failure of your policy. And my belief is that we need new solutions. And I've tried to outline the reasons for that. Thank you.